Delmarva Today with Don Rush.
Governor Wes Moore comes to the Eastern Shore. Meanwhile, former Maryland Governor Larry Hogan announces his candidacy for the U.S. Senate. MPT begins a series about slavery on the Eastern Shore, and then we'll have some theater on Delmarva. Welcome to Delmarva Today. This is Don Rush. First, we turn to Susan Canfor, reporter for Coastal Point. Welcome to the program.
Hi, Don.
So we have this court ruling that came down about Kathleen McGinnis. She's the former auditor of Delaware. What do we know about it so far?
Yes, the former Delaware auditor, Kathleen McGinnis, she was charged with corruption and misconduct, and that led to a jury trial in 2022. She was sentenced to a year of probation, 500 hours of community service, and she received a $10,000 fine for a conflict of interest and misconduct convictions. She was also acquitted of felony theft charges and charges that she hired her daughter part-time and paid her, kept her on the payroll even though the young lady was in college in another state. There were more charges of felony intimidation, of spying on employee emails, and trying to stop whistleblowers. That summer, in 2022, Kathleen McGinnis was found guilty of conflict of interest, structuring and official misconduct, as well as non-compliance with state procurement law by a jury. She was found not guilty of theft, of felony, and intimidation. She resigned in October that year. That resignation came after sentencing. She was sentenced to probation for misdemeanor official conduct and also for conflict of interest related to hiring her daughter. She appealed, and this week we learned that Delaware Supreme Court upheld one conviction, but the court sent the other one to Superior Court. This week, Delaware Attorney General Kathy Jennings released a statement saying her office took on the case because nobody should be above the law or beneath justice. She said the case has had its share of theatrical rhetoric and added a jury of Superior Court judge, and now the Delaware Supreme Court have all concluded that the ex-auditor's actions were criminal. Ms. Jennings also said she was happy about the judgment and inspired by the courage of the whistleblowers who came forward to seek justice. So we'll see what happens as this case continues in Superior Court.
It'll be interesting to see. So we also, by the way, had Governor Wes Moore. He came to Cambridge this week to tout the Enough Act. That's designed to help the area which has a disproportionate number of children that are living in poverty. What did he have to say, and what did he bring?
Governor Moore said that when it comes to children living in poverty, he has had enough. And ENOUGH is the acronym he's using to promote his engaging neighborhoods, organization, unions, governments, and households, shortened to the Enough Act. And it's also known as House Bill 0694. It calls for $15 million in grant money to help communities where 20% or more of children live in poverty. Earlier this week, the governor focused on that Enough Act and how it can affect Eastern Shore residents, but not only Eastern Shore residents, those living throughout the state. Governor Moore was in Cambridge, where he met with dozens of elected officials about this plan to help children in poverty. Among them were Dr. Heidi Anderson, who's the president of the University of Maryland Eastern Shore, the mayor of Cambridge, Stephen Rideout, and Cheryl Bost. Cheryl Bost is the Maryland State Education Association president. The governor said lawmakers and leaders owe it to Maryland residents to, as he put it, disrupt the patterns that drive pain, hardship, and tragedy, and to unlock the promises of our children and communities. To get funding of up to $10 million each year, communities have to demonstrate that they're already addressing poverty challenges in what he called a holistic manner. Governor Moore went to a child care center in Cambridge, the Harry and Jeanette Weinberg Intergenerational Center at Chesapeake Grove. There he met with children, and Dr. Anderson later said that she applauded the Enough Act. She pledged her support to improve neighborhoods and communities, and of course to see that children have a promising future.
I mean, one of the things that struck me, by the way, is that Dorchester County, nearly something like 90% of the students receive free and reduced meals. I mean, that's the third highest in the jurisdiction. And he really emphasized, particularly, as I understand it, that certainly the rural areas.
The rural areas in Dorchester County. There are also a lot in Wycomico County, even in Worcester County, which is considered a rather, especially in the Ocean City area, a rather wealthy county. There still are children that have free lunches and other problems with poverty. So he's apparently this has been brought to his attention, and he's doing something to address it. And that's why Governor Moore is such a popular governor. I think already he's addressing things that are brought to his attention, and he hasn't been in office that long.
That's true. And we also have the Route 50 bridge and the dualization of 90. What's going on with that? I understand that what Ocean City sent a letter. What kind of prospects do we have in terms of like being able to get into Ocean City?
Yeah, we've all been stuck in traffic on Route 90 going into and out of Ocean City on a busy summer weekend. And if you're sitting in that traffic, hot and eager to get to your hotel or eager to walk barefoot on the beach, you've probably daydreamed about a wider Route 90 and a wider bridge and moving faster into Ocean City. And you might have thought the same thing while waiting in traffic about crossing the Route 50 drawbridge in downtown Ocean City. You are certainly not alone. Ocean City officials have been talking about upgrading these roadways for years. At the Ocean City Council meeting last week, the city manager, Terry McGeehan, talked to council members about a letter he sent outlining requests. The priorities in that letter are, of course, dualizing Route 90 and maybe even replacing the drawbridge on Route 50 that leads into downtown Ocean City. There have been plans discussed in recent years that include making the two-lane Route 90 4 lanes by dualizing it from Coastal Highway to Route 113. The State Highway Administration is not considering dualizing the entire length of Route 90. As far as the drawbridge, it has been known to malfunction. You've probably been on it when it's malfunctioned. I've been on it when it's malfunctioned. And there are delays. So Ocean City officials are asking that it be replaced with what Mr. McGeehan called, when he wrote that letter, a new, reliable drawbridge with a taller clearance. Route 90 is a state highway. It's almost 12 miles long from near Whaleyville into Ocean City. You might remember that 2 years ago, in 2022, then Governor Larry Hogan stood in kind of a grassy area right near the Route 90 bridge, and he said that $15 million was going to be given from the state to the Department of Transportation State Highway Administration to accelerate planning and design. That was 2 years ago, but as we know, government doesn't always move as fast as it should, so they're still talking about it, and the town of Ocean City officials now are trying to push it to happen even faster.
I mean, this has really been a serious problem, particularly at the bridge, because you do have that situation where it's not as tall as perhaps it should be, and sometimes you can see the traffic just backed up for miles.
Backed up all the way. I've seen people, as I live in Ocean Pines in Maryland, and I've seen people try to get on that 90 bridge in Ocean Pines and actually somehow find a way to make a U-turn, get off a 90 and try 50, which is just as bad on a busy summer weekend. It's just as bad to try to go over the drawbridge. Traffic is just atrocious.
So at this point, do we know much about the progress of this? As you mentioned a moment ago, it was a couple of years ago, and $15 million is a pretty small amount to even get started. I mean,
they haven't gotten started yet. They're still talking about it, still sending letters, still complaining about it. Another summer will probably come and go with that same traffic backed up. But the town of Ocean City has now gotten involved as well as the state, and they're trying to push the state along to accelerate it.
And we also have elections coming up. Selbyville, amongst others. What are we looking at there? Any big changes?
Yes, Selbyville election has been canceled. There was a March 2nd election that was planned in Selbyville, but it was canceled, and only because only one person filed. There's one seat available, and only one person filed. So I'm sorry, in Selbyville, 2 people filed. I'm sorry, I have it confused with another town. In Selbyville, 2 people filed, Carol Carey, who's an incumbent, and Monroe Hudson. So there are no challengers, which means they are automatically reelected, and they'll be sworn in on March 4th. Councilwoman Carey is a retired school administrator. She ran for office a few years ago after she moved to this area with her husband. On the council, she's the administrative commissioner and very active on the town's new economic development committee. And that committee is trying to bring new business to town and spruce up the downtown to make it more inviting. There's a new food truck in downtown Selbyville now that's gotten a lot of attention, and there are some upgrades the town is looking for. Monroe Hudson has a background in law enforcement. He on the council, he's more of a listener. He doesn't say a lot. He's kind of a man of few words, but his presence is strong, and he's always there at council meetings. The other council members are Gary Steffen and Chris Snyder, and the mayor is Rick Duncan. Those terms will end in March 2025 next year. But this year, we already have 2 new council members due to the election being canceled. And in Ocean View, there's also in election news in Ocean View, there's only 1 seat on that council, currently held by Mayor Pro Tem Don Walsh. He hasn't filed yet for re-election. He has until March 12th to file. Anyone has until March 12th to file. If he does file and nobody else does, he too will automatically be reelected and continue for a 3-year term.
Is it any surprise that it doesn't seem like there's a lot of turnover here at all?
These little towns in Delaware that I cover, Millville, Ocean View, Millsboro, not so much. There usually are more people that run for office in Millsboro. Selbyville, Ocean View, they have trouble finding people to run, even for mayor. They usually have to. Sometimes they'll have to put out like an announcement. Please serve your community. Please run. They really don't have the interest. It doesn't seem in the past several years to be on the council. So that's why we have these situations when only one person is running for one seat. So they're automatically in.
Does it affect it? I mean, in terms of how the councils operate? I mean, is it that they, for instance, have people that have been there a long time and things perhaps move a little more slowly than?
In Selbyville, they were there for years and years. The mayor and two of the council members were there for many years. The mayor and those council members resigned or retired. I guess they said they retired a couple years ago. So the council is newer now. There are new people on there, younger people with new ideas and new visions. In Ocean View, they're fairly newer, not as new as they are in Selbyville. But once they get in office, you really don't see a difference. It's just business as usual. It's just getting them to run. That seems to be the problem.
Any big issues that we see, maybe not certainly in the elections, but the kinds of issues that they might have to deal with, development, that kind of thing?
In Selbyville, absolutely. It's growing like crazy. New developments, requests for annexation. Almost at every Selbyville council meeting, somebody requests land being annexed into town. In Ocean View, there are some annexation requests. Ocean View is small, and it runs very well. The budget is always done well. There aren't any financial problems. Same with Selbyville. So I say growth is the big thing. Growth, Ocean View traffic, just like Ocean City, the traffic is atrocious. You can't move from place to place in the summertime, and those things have to be addressed. Safety on the roads, bicyclist safety, pedestrian safety. A lot of people run and jog and bicycle on this very narrow bike trail on each side of Route 26, which is the 1 mile length of Ocean View. And the police are always talking about safety, pedestrian safety, and trying to do things to improve it. So those are the big issues.
Oh, yeah, because I know, for instance, in terms of safety, we had the Canup situation, the young man who was killed by apparently a hit and run.
In Ocean City,
really
yes.
Tough.
Yes, a couple years ago, yes. Same thing in Ocean View. There was somebody killed on a bicycle a few years ago in Ocean View. Luckily, nothing recently. The police there are just excellent. The police there are just always there, always helping, always telling people stay off the highway, stay on the on the bike path. So they do a very good job in both towns. But growth and traffic are the two big problems. They have been, and they say that those are problems they want to have. Those are problems that a growing town should have. But it's not good for pedestrians and bikers.
Then we have the 8th annual Ocean City Film Festival, and we have John Waters, who was supposed to be there.
He's coming back. He was here last year, and he's coming back. Filmmaker John Waters, who's known for the cult classic movie Hairspray, the original one, made in 1988 with Sonny Bono. Not that remake with John Travolta and Michelle Pfeiffer, but the original 1988 version is coming back to Ocean City. He was there last year, and he's returning for the 8th annual Ocean City Film Festival on March 9th at the Ocean City Performing Arts Center. He's going to present Hairspray, and he's going to talk about memories of how it was made in Baltimore. Fans of Hairspray might remember that it was set in the 1960s, and it was about a teenager named Tracy who called herself pleasantly plump and who wanted to be a dancer on TV. And we learned the movie was different from John Waters' earlier movies and had a PG rating, which was kind of mild compared to some of his previous films. In a news release, Waters called the movie a special obsession that didn't scare people. Tickets to that film festival tickets to see John Waters start at $59. And there will be a few VIP tickets to meet him after the show. If you're interested, you can see ocmdfilmfestival.com. This festival is being presented by the Ocean City Art League, and it's going to be from March 7th through March 10th. There will be films throughout Ocean City, including at the Flagship Cinema in West Ocean City, at Secrets, at Princess Royale Oceanfront, and the Ashore Hotel on Coastal Highway in Ocean City. So it should be a good time to see John Waters and enjoy some of those independent films, which are always some of them are very intellectually stimulating and really interesting films. I love going to those things.
Yeah, matter of fact, there's a number of films from Canada, Portugal, Iran, Turkey, France, Germany. I mean, it should be really interesting.
It's getting bigger all the time. The one in Rehoboth has always been the one everybody went to. In the last couple of years, Ocean City has had one. It's getting almost as big, and it will in years to come.
We've been speaking with Susan Canfor. She's a reporter for Coastal Point. Appreciate you stopping by and chatting with us.
It's always a pleasure. Thank you.
You're listening to Delmarva Today. This is Don Rush.
Delmarva Today with Don Rush.
Maryland Eastern Shore has produced such famous names as Harriet Tubman and Frederick Douglass, but also saw a rising free black population that often lived side by side with slaves. You're listening to Delmarva Today. This is Don Rush. Maryland Public Television is taking a deeper look at the institution as premiere of Ben's 10, Chattel Slavery on Maryland's Eastern Shore. It has been produced in conjunction with the Maryland Department of Transportation. It begins with the discovery of what is believed to be the home of Ben Ross, the father of Harriet Tubman. We have with us on the phone this afternoon Dr. Julie Shablitsky. She's the chief archaeologist for the Maryland Department of Transportation. She leads a team of archaeologists and historians to uncover artifacts which illuminate the history of slavery on the Eastern Shore. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
So what, first of all, led you to this particular site, and why do you believe that it is Ben Ross's home?
Well, right before COVID hit, I received a call from the Blackwater National Wildlife Refuge leader, Marcia Pradines, and she told me that they had just acquired some property that they thought that Ben Ross's home was on. And I said, Ben Ross? And she said, yes. She said, he's the father of Harriet Tubman. And we believe that his home is here somewhere in this property. And the reason that was is because there are historical documents and references to Old Ben's place. And so we knew the approximate location of where it could be, but until we did some archaeology, we really couldn't pin down where X marked the spot.
So what did you find there then in terms of artifacts that might indicate that this was indeed his home?
Well, that's an interesting question, because when we first started out, I thought, people have been living here for hundreds of years, thousands of years. We're going to find all sorts of artifacts, including artifacts specifically dating to the 19th century when enslaved people and other folks lived here. And so I thought, well, how do we go ahead and determine unequivocally this is where Ben Ross's home was? Well, what ended up happening was when we got out there and began to excavate these holes systematically in our search area, what happened is we never found anything except for one particular site that dated to the first half of the 19th century, and that would have been the time that Ben Ross was living in that location. So just by, sheer deduction, there's no other option for his home. And the other thing we wanted to look at, too, was not just what the artifact is dated to, but the types of artifact. Was this an industrial site? Was it simply just a person's trash? So how did we determine if it was a home? And what we did is we looked at the type of artifacts we're bringing up. So bits of brick, window glass, household items like dishes and glass, personal items, buttons, buckles, even food remains. So we knew that this was someone's home.
So one of the fine things that you found, as I understand, is a coin from 1808. What's the significance of that?
Well, the discovery of the coin was kind of interesting because it didn't come right from the home place of Ben Ross. Where it came from was a location leading into that home place. It was a very important and pivotal discovery because for days we were digging and digging without finding anything, and we were kind of getting discouraged, and it was very wet out. And the discovery of that coin with a metal detector within the first 5 minutes of looking really gave me the push to keep on looking. And the importance of that particular coin is the year 1808 was the year that Ben Ross and Rick Green, Harriet Tubman's mother, began a family and married. So that was important. Also, that's the year the transatlantic slave trade ended. And just having that coin have Lady Liberty on it is kind of ironic. So I believe that coin just, in a way, was kind of our sign to just keep on digging, and I'm glad we did.
So, by the way, what is it like to hold these artifacts in your hands? I mean, artifacts that people so many years ago held, and particularly slaves and how they got along in life. I mean, what is that textual feeling like when you have these things in your hand?
Yeah, so as an archaeologist, when you're excavating things and you're pulling ceramic sherd and broken glass and people's buttons from the earth, you're in the zone, right? So you're excavating, you're recovering things, you're recovering data, you're recovering people's personal items. And at first, unless you sit there and you pause for a moment and just think to yourself, wow, this is the first time someone has worn this or held this in their hand for 200 years, you kind of sometimes will miss that human connection with the people that you're learning about and discovering things about. So I think it's exciting, but you have to sometimes stop to be a scientist, but stop and become a human, and really to get that important connection, because so much of what we find is so important, not just to archaeologists and people interested in Maryland history, but to descendant communities. So for this project in general, the artifacts are interesting, but it really comes about the people and the people who are living today, like the Tubman descendants.
As a matter of fact, one of the Ben Ross's descendants, Ernestine Tina Martin Wyatt, she's, I guess he was her 4 times great-grandfather, and here's what she had to say about the impact of such findings.
When you know how you were able to survive, you get inspired and able to take that information that your ancestors, what happened to them and how they lived, and use it as information that you can use for your own life. When we know all those things about each other and about our DNA and what is a part of our lives from way back, it just helps us to be more successful now, and know that that we do come from something and someone that is even greater at being able to work through different situations in their lives.
What is it like to work with families who are related, in this particular case, obviously, to Ben Ross and Harriet Tubman, and the impact that this has on them, to be able to see something very concrete about their ancestors?
Well, we wouldn't be doing archaeology, I believe, or we shouldn't be, unless we do have descendant communities involved. This is their family. This is their heritage. We are simply liaisons between the past and those living descendants, and I think that it gives us reasons behind what we're doing. And it's traumatic history. Working with people who have ancestors who were enslaved, there's a lot of generational trauma. There's I think pain, but at the same time, when you can help them reach their family and put something in their hand that their own great-great-great-grandfather held in their hand, that's why we do what we do. We really try to connect those people from the past with their living descendants, because archaeology is not just about what happened 200 years ago. It's what's happening today.
So the other thing I wanted to explore a bit was that you note in the documentary that these were not necessarily large plantations like we think of as in the South, the large cotton plantations in particular that we think of, that these are actually fairly small and fairly intimate.
Yeah, that's the interesting thing about Maryland, is Maryland was so diverse. It still is. And the diversity really played out when you looked at how they're making a living. So up north, it's different. There's, more, excuse me, there's more grain crops. There's more industry. And down in southern Maryland, there was more tobacco, while on the Eastern Shore, they were doing mixed grains and agriculture, but they're also doing a lot with the logging. Timber was important back then. It helped build ships. It was part of people's homes, and it helped fuel heat. So again, it was very diverse out here. In the Eastern Shore is different. You have multiple generations here that were enslaved, and those descendants of the enslaved are living here today. They're in Cambridge. They're local, and so. So yeah, it was different. It's not the same as down south, where you have hundreds and hundreds of people on these large cotton plantations. It was a little bit different, and people knew each other.
Because one of the things I think there's an observation one of the people in the documentary makes is that it may have been small. For instance, there might be only 5 to 8 people enslaved in one place, maybe 50 in another. But that despite that smallness, the observation was made that perhaps it made it more vicious. Do you think that's true?
I think it was, because, when your enslaver, and you may have known them since you were a child, and yet they continue to enslave you and to enact that sort of cruelty to you of taking away any sort of freedom or free choice, we're never going to know what that would have been like. We can just imagine. So I think that that's probably why it was cruel, because they continued to enslave these people their entire lives. They would enslave their children. And I think the thing about the East Coast of the United States is that, slavery was racist, right? So if an African-American enslaved woman had a child, her child would have been also enslaved. And I think that's what makes it, just a horrible, horrible system.
Because a lot of them were able to hire themselves out. You mentioned, for instance, in the documentary, Harriet Tubman, who made money. In the film, you kind of illustrate this sort of contradiction about being sold and also being hired out.
For hire, a Negro boy, 13 years old, who has been accustomed to housework. Gardner Bailey, March 27.
Will be sold at public sale on 6 months credit on Friday, the 22nd of April next. A Negro girl, about 20 years of age, and her male child, Alec, about 18 months old.
What struck me about that particular clip is this idea that how restrictive all of this was, that they were able to hire themselves out, but only as the master, for example, decided that they could, or oftentimes they could find themselves being sold out.
Yeah, I mean, it was expensive for the enslaver to keep people year-round when they may have only needed them seasonally. So that's why they'd allow them to go out and to kind of rent themselves out and make what they could for money. So they would do things where they'd work. They would maybe raise chickens or plants or vegetables or fish in the river and trade or sell those to people around the area. And they were able to buy and have money and to go out and buy things they would need, including food, as well as things that we were finding in our archaeological sites, which are, ceramics and dishes.
Because the other part of this, by the way, is that despite the fact that we have the slavery, we also have this growing free black population that's coming about. I know, for instance, in East End, there's what could be the oldest free black community in terms of continuity, perhaps even besting at Treme, I guess it is in Louisiana. But what about that? The fact that you had this sort of side-by-side where free blacks oftentimes were intermarried or interconnected to those who were enslaved.
Right. Well, we can't assume that the way that the enslaver, the white community, looked at African Americans were the same as the way they looked at each other. So, for example, just because you were enslaved, that was not a choice of your own. That was, something that was thrust upon you. And those communities, worked together. They were families. They were related to each other. So free and enslaved may have had less of an impact on those closer, tighter communities than maybe people who were the enslavers would have looked at them as. So I don't think that's uncommon. And then once you have emancipation, you have these communities that continue to be able to form churches and schools and really begin to strengthen as a group of people. We're seeing that right now. We've kind of transitioned from looking specifically at Harriet Tubman to looking at her larger community that she lived among when she was there in the 19th century. So right now we're starting to look at the Mullins Church community specifically and trying to learn what their stories are all about as well.
Because much of the activity, by the way, did surround the water, fishing, shipping, that kind of thing. And I understand that the black watermen in particular were significant in terms of this communication between, obviously, those who were enslaved and those perhaps who were free up north. They seem to be a key element, particularly, obviously, in terms of the Underground Railroad, but just in terms of a presence there, a connection to the outside world.
Yeah, I mean, the blackjacks or the watermen, they were there and they were on the water. They're moving up and down. And so back then, the interstates, the highways of the day, were the rivers and canals. So these men would move things and goods up and down those rivers, but they'd also be moving information and communication. So they were important. They were also very well versed at reading the stars and knowing where the waterways were, how the weather affected those wetlands. And so all that sort of information, I believe, was likely passed down to conductors of the Underground Railroad and also given and passed along to Harriet Tubman.
The other thing about the Underground Railroad is that we have these sort of conceptions about what it was, but clearly it in the documentary you described it as being somewhat different than what we think of it.
Yeah, a lot of people, when they think of the Underground Railroad, they actually physically think of an underground tunnel of some type or little holes in the ground where people would secret themselves. And instead, the Underground Railroad was usually an above-ground system. It was a network of both enslaved and free blacks as people, as well as whites as well. And they had all sorts of ways to communicate, to move, groups of people to the north.
And in terms of that, I mean, you might have something like 45 stops, I think, between here and Philadelphia. I mean, there were a lot of people that you had to engage with.
Yeah, and the frustrating thing, I think, for historians and archaeologists in general is because it was such a secret system, very little of it has been passed down, and we don't know that much about it. There's some things we know, but it's usually through oral histories.
And the other thing, too, is that there are a lot of myths, by the way, that have obviously emerged about spirituals and about signs and so on and so forth to help slaves escape, as it were. But some of that is not really true.
Yeah, I think that with any history, whether it's the Underground Railroad, there's going to be myth and lore. And it's really sometimes hard unless you can find a primary historical document that references that, or, multiple lines of evidence. It's really hard to substantiate some of the songs that were used, or putting a signal outside your home. So it was more word of mouth, and a lot of the control was among both enslaved and free black communities. They're the ones who moved their people to freedom, in particular.
Because and you do focus on Harriet Tubman, who had her own sort of special way to indicate to people when it was time to leave and when it was time to stay, or when it was safe or not.
Yeah, she would sing, and the songs would increase in tempo and variety, and that information was passed along to the people who needed to know that, so that they knew when to come out and when it was time to self-liberate.
Because it seemed as if there's a sort of very complex human web here in terms of the slaves and how they communicated and how they were able to, obviously many to go ahead and escape, while others, survived on the plantations themselves. I mean, there does seem this very complex society that we don't really necessarily think about, and that they weren't necessarily just simply isolated on a particular plantation, but rather they could communicate across the way.
Yeah, and that's another thing too. Is like the communities and enslaved people, each person had such a different experience, not just based on which part of Maryland or which part of the East Coast they were living, but also where they were enslaved at. I mean, people had all sorts of different experiences, whether they're a man, woman, or child, what their enslaver was like. So you really have to think that there is this complexity out there, and that's, I think, the one thing as an archaeologist who studies material culture that's kind of frustrating too, is that the more that we look at the variety of lives these people lived and how they communicated, the more complex it becomes. I mean, humans are complex in general, but what we're finding is that, just through historical records even, is that some people kind of surrendered to their situation while others resisted 1,000%, and they did everything to become free. And I think in that story, in that spirit, is where we can all find inspiration.
Finally, what kind of role did the geography play in how they escaped and how they, for that matter, that they lived in terms of getting away? I think some note that winter was a good time as opposed to, say, summer or some of the wet seasons.
Yeah, that's the thing, is that if you're not familiar with the Blackbird National Wildlife Refuge and this part of southern Dorchester County, for one, it's changing. Sea level rise is really beginning to impact and making things very hard to dig and to really get around, and you can only reach certain parts of this part of the Eastern Shore during drier seasons. So historically, if we're looking at Harriet Tubman and her wanting to leave during the winter time, December was a good time, of course, when it was cold, when all the brush was down, when there weren't bugs and snakes and everything else that would kind of hinder your path. It's also during the Christmas time period. A lot of times enslaved people would get passes to visit their family, so that kind of gave them sometimes a day or two ahead of everyone else.
So looking ahead, by the way, so this is going to air in February, is it the 19th, I think this is? And what have you got else planned in terms of looking at and exploring this issue?
Well, the thing is, there's never going to be a shortage of trying to find these sorts of stories in the swamps of Dorchester County. But what we're doing now is we're we're beginning to understand that Harriet Tubman, although we see her as a hero, a single woman that led so many people to freedom, we're beginning to realize and see that she was part of a larger community that helped her. So we're beginning to talk to descendants of people that were part of her community and learning their stories, and we're going to be going out and finding even the locations where Harriet Tubman used to live in another location along just south of Madison on White Marsh Road. So we're going to be looking there. We're going to be working with the Maroons Church community to try and find more homes, more archaeological sites that are part of the larger Harriet Tubman landscape.
We were speaking with Dr. Julie Shablitsky. She's the chief archaeologist for the Maryland Department of Transportation. She leads a team of archaeologists and historians to uncover artifacts which illuminate the history of slavery on the Eastern Shore. Appreciate you taking the time to talk with us this afternoon.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
You're listening to Delmarva Today. This is Don Rush.
Delmarva Today with Don Rush.